A millionaire hired a humble woman as his daughter's nanny. One day, he came home early and wept at what he found she had done for them. Diana took a deep breath, running her hands through her soft, wavy brown hair, trying to steady her nerves as she glanced at Alice and Amber, who were cozying up in their beds. At 28, Diana still couldn't believe how her life had turned out. Caring for kids in a lavish mansion on the outskirts of Boston wasn't what she had envisioned, but she had come to love it more than she expected. The bond she had formed with the twins and the knowledge that she was having a real impact on their lives gave her a purpose she never saw coming, but one she gladly accepted. The 6-year-old girls, with their golden curls and striking blue eyes, looked like they belonged in a picture-perfect fairy tale. Diana smiled wearily as she tucked Alice's blanket around her. "Miss Diana, can you tell just one more story? Please," Amber pleaded, her big eyes brimming with hope. "Sweetheart, it's really late. Your parents wouldn't be too happy if they knew you were still up," Diana responded gently, holding back the urge to give in. The children's room, with its pastel walls and shelves overflowing with expensive toys, felt worlds apart from the small apartment Diana called home. She walked over to the window, drawing the silk curtains and glancing out at the perfectly manicured garden. The night was unusually quiet, almost too quiet. A strange unease washed over Diana, making her shiver as she heard something outside. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the unsettling feeling. "Girls, did you hear that noise?" Diana asked, trying to keep her voice light. Alice mumbled sleepily. "Just Mr. Whiskers up on the roof again. Daddy says we'll have to get the firefighters to help him down one of these days." Diana chuckled softly, thankful for the girl's innocence. She turned towards the door, ready to switch off the lights and let them drift off to sleep. That's when she heard it. A faint creak in the hallway, like someone trying to move quietly on the old wooden floor. Her heart pounded, adrenaline surging through her veins as she froze, fingers gripping the light switch. "What was that?" Amber asked, sitting up in bed with wide, frightened eyes. "That doesn't sound like Mr. Whiskers, does it?" Diana forced a smile, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's probably just the wind, sweetie. Go back to sleep." Inside, her mind raced. The Norris weren't supposed to be home for at least 2 more hours. Who could be out in the hallway? Diana took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She knew she had to check, but the thought of leaving the girls by themselves was terrifying. Her instinct to protect the children clashed with her need to find out what was causing the noise. "Stay here, Amber. I'm just going to peek outside, all right?" Diana said, her voice quivering a bit. Amber nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "You'll be right back, won't you?" Diana swallowed, forcing herself to smile reassuringly. "Of course, honey. I'll be back before you can even say bear hug." With one last glance at the twins, Diana turned the doorknob, her heart thumping in her chest. She knew stepping into the unknown was scary, but keeping the kids safe came first. Taking another deep breath, she opened the door and stepped into the dim hallway, leaving the girls in the lit bedroom behind her. Diana tiptoed down the second-floor hallway, her feet barely making a sound on the thick Persian rug that ran along the polished wooden floors. The darkness felt heavy, broken only by faint moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Her heart hammered in her chest, and cold sweat trickled down her back. Every step she took was met with the eerie creaks of the old house, making her flinch. She stopped, holding her breath, listening for anything unusual. "Calm down, Diana," she whispered under her breath. "You need to stay calm for the girls." A soft noise from the end of the hallway made her freeze. Her eyes widened in the shadows. The sound seemed to be coming from the big built-in closet where they stored linens and towels. Slowly, with hesitant steps, Diana approached it, her hand shaking as she reached for the ornate handle. Every part of her wanted to run back to the kids, but something pushed her forward. "What is that sound? Is someone there?" she whispered, barely above a breath. There was no reply, only another faint sound, like someone trying to talk through a gag. Heart pounding, Diana turned the knob slowly, each click echoing through her as she prepared to face whatever was on the other side. The door creaked loudly as it swung open, revealing the pitch black inside of the closet. For a split second, Diana stood, frozen in disbelief at the sight before her. "Oh my God. Mr. and Mrs. Norris, are you okay? Who did this to you? What happened?" she gasped, her hand instinctively covering her mouth in shock. There, on the closet floor, Mr. and Mrs. Norris sat huddled together, eyes wide and filled with terror. Thick ropes bound them tightly, and their mouths were sealed shut with tape. Diana immediately dropped to her knees, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the ropes trying to free them. Mr. Norris shook his head wildly, his eyes begging her not to untie them, as if he were trying to warn her of something urgent. "Don't worry, I'm going to get you out of here. Who did this?" Diana asked, her voice shaky as she struggled with the knots. Suddenly, a chill ran down Diana's spine. An overwhelming sense of danger settled over her, making the hair on her arms stand on end. She slowly turned, her body tense with fear. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A shadow gliding silently down the hallway. Time seemed to stand still as she stared into the darkness, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Her heart pounded in her chest as the shadow materialized into the form of a tall man, his face concealed by a black mask. Through the slits in the mask, his eyes glared menacingly, radiating a cold, dangerous energy. Diana's legs felt weak, but instinct took over. Without a second thought, she bolted for the stairs, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the eerily quiet house. "Help! Somebody please! Call the police!" Diana shouted, her voice filled with desperation as she tried to get the attention of anyone nearby. Even though she knew the property was too large for anyone to hear, she had to try. The masked man was surprisingly fast, his footsteps pounding behind her, growing closer and closer with each step. She could feel him closing in, his presence looming like a cold shadow behind her. As Diana reached the top of the stairs, she quickly glanced back. The masked man was right there, his hand just inches away from grabbing her. In a last-ditch effort, she threw herself forward, skipping several steps in a frantic attempt to get away. "There's no point in running. You've got nowhere to run," the intruder's gruff voice echoed ominously down the hallway. Diana's heart pounded as she raced down the stairs, moving as fast as her legs would carry her. Her feet barely touched the steps, and her heavy breath seemed to echo in her ears, loud and frantic. Adrenaline pumped through her veins, heightening her senses. She could hear the floorboards creak under the weight of her pursuer's boots, each step getting closer. Diana fought to stay calm, knowing that one wrong move could mean the end. "Come on, Diana, think. There's got to be a way out of here," she urged herself. But just as she reached the bottom landing, her foot slipped on the smooth surface of the step. Time seemed to slow down in that split second. Her body lost its balance, and her hands flailed wildly, trying to grab hold of something, anything. The banister was too far, and in an instant, she felt herself falling. She tumbled down the last few steps, every impact jarring her body with sharp pain. "No, not now. The girls, I have to protect them," she thought desperately, her mind clouded with both pain and panic. As she came to a halt at the foot of the stairs, Diana's body lay still. Every muscle ached, and her vision blurred as she fought to stay awake. Through her hazy sight, she saw the masked figure coming down the stairs, each step slow and deliberate. The sound of his approach mingled with the ringing in her ears. "Please, someone help," Diana whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. As the darkness threatened to engulf her, fear gripped her, not for herself, but for the twins upstairs, alone and defenseless. With everything she had left, she tried to move, but her body refused to cooperate. The last thing Diana saw was the shadow of the intruder looming over her, growing larger with each step he took. The girls. God, please protect the girls, she prayed silently before everything went black. Moments later, Diana's eyes fluttered open, her consciousness returning slowly like a fog lifting. She was in the pitch-black basement. Her head throbbed as she realized her arms and legs were tied tightly to a wooden chair. The memories of the attack came rushing back, disjointed and chaotic. The freezing cold of the basement crept into her bones, and the damp, musty smell filled the air around her. Diana blinked rapidly, trying to adjust her sight to the dim light as the shapes of stacked boxes and old furniture slowly came into focus around her. The twins, the Norris. Oh no, what could have happened to them while I was out? She whispered to herself, her heart pounding with anxiety. Trying to push back the panic, Diana tugged against the ropes tied around her wrists and ankles. The ropes were thick and tight, cutting into her skin with each movement. She clenched her teeth, refusing to give in to the fear building inside her. Her eyes swept over the room, desperate to find anything that could help her break free. On the far wall, she spotted an old rusty saw hanging, so close yet so far out of reach. There has to be a way out of here, she murmured, her mind racing through possible ways to escape. There was a loud creak from the floor above that broke the eerie silence in the basement. Diana froze, every muscle in her body tightening as she heard footsteps. Someone was moving on the floor above, and they were getting closer to the basement door. Each step echoed in her ears like thunder, making her pulse race even faster. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. Stay calm, Diana. You have to keep your head clear to find a way out, she reminded herself, forcing her breathing to slow down. The metallic sound of a key turning in the lock stopped the footsteps. Diana's blood ran cold. Her gaze locked on the basement door, bracing herself for it to swing open, for the masked figure to come in and hurt her. Time seemed to crawl, each second dragging out painfully as she waited. The sound of her heartbeat felt deafening in her chest, and she was certain whoever was outside could hear it too. If it's the intruder from the house, I won't let him scare me. I need to stay strong for the kids. If he's busy with me, maybe they'll have a chance to escape or get help. I'll make this as hard as possible for him, give them a fighting chance. I'm not going down without making sure they stay safe, she promised herself, summoning every ounce of courage she could muster. The doorknob clicked softly, and Diana held her breath. Her wide eyes locked on the door as it slowly creaked open on its rusty hinges. A thin beam of light spilled down the basement stairs, widening as the door opened further. The shadowy outline of someone formed against the light, and Diana felt her body begin to shake with fear and anticipation. Whoever it was, they were about to come face to face with her. "Who's there? What do you want?" Diana's voice rang out, shaky but laced with a fierce determination not to show any fear. Upstairs, Alice and Amber were jolted awake by the faint sound of a cry. The twins exchanged uneasy glances in the dim light of their room, their wide eyes betraying the dread they both felt. Amber, always the more daring one, was the first to slip out of bed, her bare feet making no noise on the thick carpet. "Alice, did you hear that? I think it was Miss Diana." "We need to make sure she's okay," Amber whispered, reaching out to her sister. Alice hesitated, but then grabbed Amber's hand, letting her sister pull her from the bed. The two girls, dressed in matching unicorn pajamas, quietly approached the door. Amber gently turned the knob, opening it just a crack to peek into the dark hallway. Seeing no one, she signaled Alice, and they both stepped out into the hall. What if it's a monster? Maybe we should go back to bed, Alice whispered, her voice quivering with fear. Amber squeezed her sister's hand, trying to be brave. Don't be silly. Monsters aren't real, and Miss Diana might need us, she said. They began creeping down the stairs, their hearts racing in their chests. Unbeknownst to them, their parents were still tied up in the closet, unable to call out and warn the girls. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, they paused, straining to hear anything. The muffled sounds were coming from the direction of the kitchen. Come on, it's probably Miss Diana. Maybe she's making us hot chocolate, Amber whispered, tugging Alice toward the kitchen. Alice followed hesitantly, clinging tightly to her sister's arm. But what if it's not her? What if it's someone bad? That noise didn't sound right, Alice muttered. The girls cautiously entered the dark kitchen, their eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. A soft glow from the moon spilled through the window above the sink, faintly lighting up the room. Amber ran her hand along the wall, searching for the light switch, but she froze as a creak echoed from the basement door. Alice, look, there's someone there, Amber whispered, pointing toward the basement. The twins stood frozen in place as a shadowy figure stepped slowly out of the basement. The figure was tall and threatening, definitely not Miss Diana. The girls clung to each other, their hearts pounding in terror as they tried desperately to stay quiet. Amber held Alice's hand tightly, both trembling with fear. With her heart racing, Amber tugged her sister towards the back door of the kitchen, their bare feet quietly gliding over the cold floor. They moved cautiously, their eyes glued to the shadowy figure emerging from the basement. The twins crouched low, inching around the kitchen island, using it as cover as they slowly moved towards the exit. Amber gripped the doorknob, turning it ever so gently to avoid any sound. Slowly, Alice, she whispered in barely a breath. We can't let him hear us. As the door creaked open, just a little, both girls froze in place. The cool night air slipped in, carrying the faint smell of freshly cut grass and the distant chirping of crickets. Amber shot a quick glance behind them, confirming the intruder was still preoccupied, before carefully pulling Alice outside. The moonlight bathed the backyard, casting long shadows over the neatly kept lawn, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Amber, I'm scared. Where's Miss Diana? Alice whimpered, clinging to Amber's arm. The two moved quickly through the yard, their feet pressing into the damp grass. They weaved between shadows, hiding behind bushes and small trees for cover. Amber's pulse raced so hard, she swore it could be heard from miles away. Her eyes scanned the yard for an escape route or somewhere safe to hide. We have to get to Mrs. Patel's, Amber thought out loud, remembering the friendly neighbor who always smiled at them. She'll help us, Alice. As they reached the fence separating their yard from Mrs. Patel's, something suddenly caught Amber's eye. She pulled Alice behind a large hydrangea bush, the thick flowers offering the perfect hiding spot. The girls crouched, struggling to control their shaky breathing. Amber peeked through the leaves, her wide eyes watching as the kitchen door swung open completely. He's coming, Amber whispered, her voice trembling. Don't move. The intruder stepped into the backyard, his tall figure menacing in the light from the house. He looked around, clearly suspecting the girls had slipped outside. Amber held her breath, praying silently that they wouldn't be found. Just then, something unexpected broke the tension. A loud bark shattered the quiet night, making both girls jump in fright. Mrs. Patel's dog in the neighboring yard barked furiously in their direction. Amber whipped her head toward the barking sound as the intruder's eyes scanned the yard with renewed intensity. Oh no, he's going to catch us, Alice whispered in a shaky voice, pressing her face into Amber's shoulder. Without a moment's hesitation, Amber grabbed Alice's hand, yanking her down to the ground as she signaled her to crawl toward the treehouse. They moved quickly across the wet grass, their unicorn pajamas now streaked with mud in their frantic attempt to get away. Amber's heart was beating so loudly she was sure the intruder could hear it. Reaching the massive oak tree, she stood up and urgently pushed Alice toward the rope ladder. "Climb fast, Alice. Don't look back, just go," Amber urged, quietly but firmly. The girls climbed as silently as they could, their small hands gripping the wooden rungs for dear life. Amber could hear Alice's ragged breaths in front of her, along with the faint barking of the neighbor's dog in the distance. Finally, they made it to the platform of the treehouse, scrambling inside the wooden structure their dad had built last summer. "Amber, I'm scared. Where's Miss Diana? And what about Mom and Dad? Do you think they're home from work yet? What if the bad guy catches them?" Alice asked, hugging her knees tightly to her chest. Amber quickly shushed her, placing a finger to her lips, signaling her to stay silent. She cautiously crawled to the small window, peeking out into the yard below. Her heart nearly stopped when she spotted the intruder stepping out of the kitchen door, his head swiveling from side to side as he searched for them. "He's down there." "We have to stay super quiet," Amber whispered so softly it was almost inaudible. Frozen in place, they watched as the intruder moved around the yard, systematically checking behind bushes, peeking into the tool shed, and even looking at the old tire swing. As he stepped closer to the tree, Amber's heart raced even faster. She could feel Alice shaking beside her and squeezed her hand, trying to offer some reassurance. "What if he finds us?" Alice asked, her wide eyes filled with fear. Amber swallowed hard, desperately trying to think. "Don't worry, he won't find us. Remember what Dad always says? We're his little silent ninjas." The intruder was now directly under the treehouse, looking up into the branches. The girls held their breath, shrinking back into the darkest corner of the small space. Amber could feel the man's gaze cutting through his mask, scanning every part of the tree. For one terrifying second, she was convinced he had seen them. "Where are you, you little brats? Come out, wherever you are." His gruff voice echoed through the yard. Right then, Alice shifted slightly, her elbow accidentally knocking into an old plastic toy that had been left behind in the treehouse. The toy inched toward the platform's edge. Amber watched in horror as the toy tumbled from the treehouse in what felt like slow motion, landing near the man's feet. The sound of plastic hitting the grass, though soft, echoed loudly in the stillness of the night. "Oh no, he's definitely going to find us now," Amber thought, her heart nearly stopping. The toy's impact on the ground seemed to echo through the entire yard, and they could hear the intruder's footsteps getting closer to the treehouse. Thinking quickly, Amber grabbed Alice's hand and tugged her toward a large, toy chest tucked in the corner. Panicked, she opened the lid and nudged her sister inside. "Quick, Alice, hide and be quiet," Amber whispered urgently as they both squeezed into the chest. They barely managed to close the lid before hearing the creak of the ladder. The intruder was climbing up. Huddled inside the dark, cramped chest, the sisters clung to each other, trying to control their frantic breathing. The musty scent of old wood and forgotten toys filled the air around them. Amber could feel Alice's heartbeat racing against hers. "Please, God, keep us safe." "Don't let him find us," Amber silently prayed, gripping her sister's hand tightly. They listened as his heavy footsteps moved around on the wooden platform of the treehouse. The man searched, tossing things aside as he hunted for them. The noise was so close, Amber was sure he could hear them breathing. She shut her eyes tight, thinking that if she couldn't see him, maybe he wouldn't be able to see them either. "Where are you, you little brats?" His gruff voice was muffled, but still frightening. After what felt like forever, the footsteps finally began to fade. They heard him climbing down the ladder, cursing under his breath as he left. Despite their fear, neither of them dared to budge or make a sound. They stayed frozen in place, holding their breath for what felt like forever, until they were certain the danger had passed. "Amber, I think he's gone." "Can we leave now?" Alice whispered, her voice shaky. Cautiously, Amber cracked the chest open, peering out. The yard was still, and everything looked deserted. She signaled Alice, and both girls carefully climbed out of the chest, their legs stiff and tingling from being cramped for so long. They made their way to the edge of the treehouse, scanning the yard and the house below with caution. "Look, Amber, he's in their room now." Alice pointed to a light that had just flicked on in their parents' bedroom. Inside, the intruder was ransacking the place, throwing clothes and belongings out of drawers and closets with speed and focus, like he knew exactly what he was after. He paused, rubbing his face in frustration, before his gaze landed on a large painting on the far wall. "It has to be here," the man muttered under his breath, walking straight toward the painting. With one firm pull, he yanked it off, revealing a small safe hidden behind it. A sly grin spread across his face as he ran his fingers over the surface of the safe. He had found what he was looking for. "Bingo. Now I just need to crack this combination," he muttered with satisfaction. Meanwhile, in the damp, dark basement, Diana was fighting against the ropes that had her tied to the chair. Her wrists were rubbed raw from struggling, but she couldn't stop now. Every moment mattered, and all she could think about was the twins. As she worked to free herself, her thoughts flashed back to the footsteps she'd heard just outside the basement door minutes ago. Whoever it was had luckily walked away, sending a chill down her spine. But what if they'd found the girls? With one last determined yank, she felt the ropes give way. "I have to find the girls and get them out of here," Diana whispered to herself, her eyes burning with determination. Moving quietly through the dark, her body aching with every step, she crept down the hallway. Diana had managed to escape the basement, cutting through the ropes with a broken piece of glass she found on the floor. But now, her wrists were bleeding, and the pain was almost unbearable. Her heart raced as she neared Mr. Norris's office, knowing she had no time to waste. The kids were still in danger, and Diana knew she had to move quickly. "Hold on, girls. I'm going to get you out of here, whatever it takes," she muttered under her breath. When she got to the office door, Diana pressed her ear against it, straining to hear any sign of the intruder. Hearing nothing, she cautiously turned the knob, relieved that it didn't make a sound as it opened. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight shining through the window, revealing rows of books on shelves and a large mahogany desk. Diana made her way to the desk, frantically searching for the phone. "Come on, I need to call the police before it's too late," she whispered, rummaging through the piles of papers. Finally, her hand landed on the phone next to a stack of documents. With shaking hands, Diana picked up the receiver and dialed the police, her heart pounding so loudly that she could barely hear the dial tone. Each second seemed to drag on, feeling like a lifetime as she waited for someone to pick up. Her eyes darted back to the door constantly, terrified the intruder could burst in at any moment. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the house, the masked intruder was forcing Mr. and Mrs. Norris down the hallway, their hands still bound tightly behind them. The moonlight, spilling through the windows, distorted their shadows on the walls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The man shoved the couple into the built-in cabinets, the dull thud echoing down the quiet hall. Through the slits of his mask, his eyes gleamed with both anger and determination. "Now, you're going to tell me the code to that safe. Don't even think about playing games, or things are going to get really bad," he snarled, his voice dark and menacing, before ripping the tape from their mouths. Mr. Norris, despite the fear in his eyes, held firm. "We don't know what you're talking about. There's no safe." The intruder let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Don't play dumb with me. I know about the safe," behind the painting. "What are you hiding in there?" Mrs. Norris quietly sobbed, trying to keep herself together. "Please, we have young daughters. Don't hurt our girls." The masked man leaned in closer, his face just inches away from hers. "You'd better start talking. Where are the kids, and what's the code?" A faint noise from the office immediately caught everyone's attention. The intruder whipped around, eyes narrowing with suspicion that someone might be trying to alert the police. Without a second thought, he grabbed a pair of pliers from his pocket and made his way toward the phone panel in the hallway. Meanwhile, in the office, Diana anxiously waited, praying someone would answer the emergency call. After what felt like an eternity, a voice finally came through. 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator's calm tone brought some relief. Diana took a shaky breath, trying to keep her voice low and composed. "Please, we need help. There's a man in the house. He's tied up the owners and is searching for the kids. I'm at the Norris residence on—" A noise from the hallway made Diana freeze. Her heart raced as she quickly crouched behind the desk, gripping the phone tightly. The heavy footsteps drew nearer, and panic surged through her. She knew she had to finish the call, but fear rooted her in place. "Ma'am, are you still there? What's the full address?" The operator's voice seemed distant. Diana frantically whispered, "It's on Maple Street, number... bitte," into the phone. But before she could finish, the call dropped, leaving her with nothing but the dead tone of the line. No, they don't know where we are," Diana thought frantically. Across the house, the intruder moved swiftly, cutting the phone lines, leaving the house completely isolated before Diana could give the police the full address. "Well, looks like we've got ourselves a little mouse hiding around here. This just got interesting," the intruder murmured darkly after severing the connection. "Please, don't hurt anyone. The code is 2418 and 42, Mrs. Norris pleaded. The intruder turned toward her. "See? That wasn't so tough, was it? Now let's see what you've been hiding." As he turned back toward the master bedroom, another sound from the office made him pause, his head slightly tilted in curiosity. "Seems like our sneaky little friend is starting to slip up. Guess it's time to roll out the red carpet for our unexpected visitor." "No, please, leave us alone. Don't hurt my daughters or the nanny," Mr. Norris begged, his voice shaking with fear. "None of them are involved in this. What did you do to the nanny anyway?" The intruder just chuckled, the sound sending a chill down Mr. Norris's spine. "Oh, don't worry about her. I'm sure she's enjoying a nice little rest down in the basement," he sneered. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a safe to crack and a rat to deal with." Meanwhile, upstairs in the office, Diana heard the creak of footsteps moving towards the attic. Her heart raced as she tiptoed after the sound, her pulse in her throat. More than one person was moving around up there, the floorboards creaking under the weight. Desperately scanning the dimly lit attic, she searched for any sign of the twins. "Alice, Amber, it's me, Diana. Everything's going to be fine," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. A slight rustling behind a stack of dusty boxes caught her eye. Slowly, Diana moved closer, her heart skipping a beat, as two pairs of wide, frightened eyes peered back at her. The twins were huddled together, clutching each other, their faces pale with fear. Diana knelt beside them, tears of relief forming in her eyes. "Oh, thank goodness, are you both okay?" she asked, gently checking them for injuries. Amber, ever the bold one, spoke up first. "Diana, we thought the bad man got you. We were so scared, we ran from the treehouse and hid in here to help you." Diana wrapped the girls in a tight hug, feeling their small bodies trembling. She knew time was slipping away, but in that moment, she allowed herself to breathe. The danger wasn't over, and Diana felt the weight of responsibility heavy on her. She had to get the girls out. Fast. Listen, we have to go. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to be very brave and very quiet. Can you do that? She whispered, her voice steady despite the tension. Alice, tears spilling from her eyes, nodded quietly. How are we going to get out, Diana? The bad guy's downstairs, she whispered. Diana looked around, her mind racing. Then she spotted it, a small window in the roof, half covered by a worn-out tarp. It was risky, but it might be their only shot. She stood up, gently pulling the girls with her. We're going to use that window, Diana whispered urgently, her eyes darting toward the dusty pane at the far end of the attic. We can climb down onto the roof and jump to the nearest tree. You've done that before when we were playing outside, right? She explained, pointing to the window with a quick glance at the two girls. Amber and Alice exchanged nervous looks, but nodded, a mix of excitement and fear flashing in their eyes. Diana moved quickly, clearing away some old boxes stacked haphazardly in front of the window, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every sound seemed amplified in the tense silence, the creaks of the wooden floorboards echoing through the cramped attic like thunderclaps. Sweat trickled down Diana's spine, not just from the physical effort of moving the boxes, but from the suffocating fear pressing down on her. Almost there. Just a bit more. And we'll be out, she murmured under her breath, her fingers stretching to unlatch the window. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed up the stairwell, the unmistakable sound of slow, deliberate footsteps ascending the attic stairs, heavy, menacing, step by step. Diana froze, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of her chest. Amber and Alice grabbed onto her legs, their small bodies trembling with terror. Each step grew louder and closer, as if each footfall was hammering in the finality of their situation. He's coming. What are we going to do now, Diana? Amber whimpered, her voice shaking with fear. Diana's mind raced. There wasn't time to think. Only act. With a determined grip, she seized both Amber and Alice's hands and pulled them toward the tiny attic window. The grimy glass barely let in any light, but through it, Diana could make out the roof and the distant safety of the garden below. It was risky, but they had no other choice. With quick, deliberate movements, Diana unlatched the window and pushed it open, the cool night air brushing against her flushed face. Girls, we have to be brave right now. We're going to climb down from the roof to the garage. Can you do that for me? She whispered, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. She looked deeply into Alice and Amber's eyes, searching for their courage. Diana guided Amber out first, then Alice, steadying their trembling hands as they cautiously moved onto the steep roof. Their bare feet struggled for balance on the slick tiles, but the adrenaline pumping through them pushed them forward. Diana climbed out last, constantly glancing over her shoulder at the attic stairs, her heart pounding in rhythm with the footsteps she'd heard earlier. The silence now was more unsettling than the noise. It meant the intruder was nearby, closing in. We're almost there, girls. Just a bit further, Diana whispered, her voice a soft urgency in the quiet of the night. As they reached the edge of the roof, Diana squinted down at the ground below. The drop was steep, but a sturdy tree branch hung close enough to serve as a lifeline. We'll use the branch, she whispered, more to reassure herself than the girls. She carefully helped Alice first, then Amber, their small fingers gripping the rough bark for dear life. Once they were safely on the ground, Diana swiftly led them to the garage, her pulse racing. But when they reached the door, her stomach dropped. The garage was locked. How are we going to get in? Amber asked, tugging on the door handle with all her strength, her voice trembling with frustration. Diana's eyes darted around, scanning the surroundings for a way out of this mess. Her gaze locked onto a narrow side window, barely big enough for the three of them to squeeze through. Without hesitating, Diana threw her elbow into the glass, shattering it instantly. A sharp pain shot up her arm as shards of glass tore into her skin, but she ignored the searing sting and the warm trickle of blood running down her arm. She quickly helped the twins climb through the jagged opening. Diana followed, squeezing her way into the dimly lit garage and landing with a thud on the cold concrete floor. "Hurry! Get in the car!" Diana ordered, her voice firm despite the panic rising inside her. She dashed toward the old Norris family sedan parked in the corner, her hands trembling as she frantically reached under the sun visor. With a shaky sigh of relief, her fingers found the keys. She jammed them into the ignition and twisted, praying for the engine to roar to life. The twins huddled in the back seat, their labored breaths breaking the tense silence. But as Diana turned the key, the car sputtered and groaned, refusing to start. Her sense of relief vanished in an instant, and crushing dread took its place. "No, no, no, please," Diana whispered under her breath, trying the key again, but the car remained lifeless. She flung open the door and raced to inspect what was wrong. Her heart dropped to her stomach as she stared at the completely slashed tires. Whoever had done this was one step ahead of them. Just as despair began to set in, a pair of headlights pierced through the darkness, flooding the garage with blinding light. Diana froze, instinctively placing herself in front of the children, her body a shield against the unknown threat. "Who is it? Is it the bad man?" Amber whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Diana's pulse quickened as she glanced outside the window, her breath catching in her throat. But instead of a dangerous figure, she realizes that from a police car pulling into the driveway. The headlights that had sent chills down her spine moments ago were in fact coming from the law enforcement vehicle. Though the siren was off, the silent strobe lights painted eerie, shifting patterns across the darkened street. Two officers emerged from the car, their hands resting near their holstered weapons, ready for anything. Relief washed over Diana, but the tension in her muscles reminded her that they weren't out of danger yet. "Police! Is anyone there?" one officer called out, his voice firm and commanding, echoing through the stillness of the night. "We're here. Please help us." "There's an intruder inside the house," Diana shouted back, her voice breaking slightly as she frantically waved to get their attention. She kept her arms around the twins, pulling them close in a protective embrace. "Stay here, girls," she said softly but firmly, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. "Everything is going to be okay now." Through the window, she saw the figure of the intruder darting across the backyard, leaping over bushes and weaving between the trees with desperate speed. The officers immediately gave chase, their flashlights piercing through the night as they pursued him, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. One of the officers, with quick reflexes, managed to get close enough to seize the fugitive's arm. The fugitive jerked and struggled, desperately trying to break free, his movements wild and unpredictable. But the officer's training kicked in. With practiced precision, he twisted the fugitive's arm behind his back and forced him to the ground, securing the handcuffs tightly around the man's wrists. As the first officer led the handcuffed intruder away toward the front of the house, the second officer moved quickly toward Diana and the children. His expression was a mix of concern and relief as he approached. "Is everyone okay? Is anyone hurt?" he asked, scanning them with worried eyes. Diana, her hands trembling, shook her head as tears of relief spilled down her face. "We're okay, thank God." "But the girl's parents—" "They're still inside," she said, her voice cracking slightly. The officer nodded with understanding and immediately turned to head into the house. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the officer emerged with Mr. and Mrs. Norris, both visibly shaken but unharmed. The twins, who had been standing frozen, rushed forward, throwing themselves into their parents' arms with tears of joy and relief. "Mummy! Daddy!" they cried in unison, clinging tightly to their parents as if they would never let go. Meanwhile, the intruder, now unmasked, was being loaded into the back of a police cruiser. Mr. Norris, catching a glimpse of the man's face, let out a gasp of surprise. It was Dylan, a former employee who had been terminated months ago for misconduct. "Dylan? Why?" Mr. Norris asked, his voice laced with disbelief and disappointment. Dylan's face twisted with anger as he glared at his old boss. "You ruined my life when you fired me. I just wanted what was mine, what I deserved," he spat bitterly. Diana stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. Her emotions were tangled: relief that the ordeal was over, pride for having shielded the children, and deep gratitude for the police arriving in time. She slowly made her way toward the Norris family, who were now wrapped in a tight embrace, shaken but together. Mrs. Norris, still visibly trembling from the harrowing experience, turned to Diana with eyes full of tears. She clasped Diana's hands tightly between her own, squeezing them with a mixture of overwhelming gratitude and deep emotion. The twins, Amber and Alice, clung to their mother's legs, their small faces still marked by lingering fear, but now softening with relief. "Diana, I don't even know where to start," Mrs. Norris said, her voice breaking under the weight of emotion. "What you did for our family tonight. No words can ever truly express how grateful we are." "You risked your life to protect our girls," Mrs. Norris continued, her voice thick with emotion. "The courage and dedication you've shown goes far beyond anything we could ever ask of you." She paused, drawing in a shaky breath as if to hold back the tears threatening to spill over. Diana could feel Mrs. Norris's hands trembling, the heaviness of the moment hanging between them. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cars painted the scene in shifting, eerie shadows. The night had been nothing short of chaotic, but now, in this surreal calm, Mrs. Norris's voice cut through the tension with quiet power. "When we hired you, Diana, we knew there was something special about you. But after what happened tonight, we realize now that you're so much more than we ever imagined." Her voice wavered for a moment, then grew stronger. "You're not just our nanny. You're our guardian angel, a real-life hero. The way you protected our daughters tonight, standing between them and danger, showed us exactly what kind of person you are: brave, selfless, and full of heart." The twins, standing nearby, hung on their mother's words, their eyes fixed on Diana with a newfound admiration and love. Amber, always the one to speak first, whispered, "You're our superhero, Diana." Mrs. Norris, her eyes glistening with tears, nodded. "She's right, Diana. You're a superhero, not just for the girls, but for all of us." Mrs. Norris stepped closer, her expression softening. "That's why we want you to know that from now on, you're not just a part of our household, you're a part of our family." Diana's throat tightened with emotion. The warmth and sincerity of the moment overcame her, leaving her unsure of how to respond. The adrenaline from the night had started to fade, leaving her drained but immensely grateful that everyone was safe. "And there's more," Mrs. Norris continued, a warm smile breaking through the exhaustion etched on her face. "You deserve more than just a thank you. You deserve a promotion, not just a raise. We want you to take on more responsibility within our family and our business. You've shown us time and time again that you can handle anything, and we're not only grateful, but also excited to see you grow with us." Mr. Norris, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward, his expression softening as he placed a reassuring hand on his wife's shoulder. He turned toward Diana, his gaze filled with deep respect and genuine gratitude. "Diana," he began, his deep voice carrying a weight of emotion that instantly caught her attention. "What my wife just said only scratches the surface of what we really feel. The bravery you showed, your ability to think fast under pressure, your unwavering dedication to our daughters, all of it goes far beyond what we ever imagined in a nanny." Mr. Norris paused, his eyes shifting momentarily to his daughters, who were now watching Diana with shy but appreciative smiles. He took a deep breath, his voice growing even more earnest. "You didn't just save our girls' lives that day. You safeguarded the heart of our family. That's something we can never repay you for." He glanced down briefly, clearly moved, then looked back at Diana with renewed determination. "Your swift actions, your intelligence, the way you handled such a terrifying situation, it all speaks volumes about your character, your strength. And because of that, along with the promotion my wife mentioned earlier, we'd like to offer you something more, a stake in our family business. We want you to be more than just an employee. We want you to be part of our family and our future. Your courage and insight have always impressed us, and we believe you have so much more to offer, both personally and professionally, as we move forward together." Diana was speechless. Her eyes flicked back and forth between Mr. Norris and Mrs. Norris, trying to process what she had just heard. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, as she fought back the overwhelming emotions swirling inside her. The level of trust and generosity they were extending to her left her stunned. Mr. Norris smiled warmly and nodded in understanding. "You don't have to say anything right now, Diana. Tonight has been difficult for all of us, and we know it's a lot to take in. Just know how much we value you, how much we believe in your abilities, and how much we care about you. You're not just an employee to us, Diana. You're part of this family." At that moment, the twins, sensing the depth of the conversation, dashed over to Diana, wrapping their little arms around her tightly. Amber and Alice clung to her, burying their faces into her as they hugged her with all their strength. "Please stay with us forever, Diana." Alice's muffled voice whimpered against her shirt. Diana couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down her cheeks as she gently held the girls close. She looked up, her eyes meeting Mr. and Mrs. Norris's, who watched her with tender, emotional smiles. "Thank you," Diana finally managed to whisper, her voice shaky with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me and for giving me this chance. I love these girls like they're my own sisters, and I'm truly honored to be part of your family." Mr. and Mrs. Norris joined the embrace, wrapping their arms tightly around Diana and the twins, creating a warm circle filled with love, comfort, and gratitude. They transformed into a family at that precise moment when the police car's flashing blue and red lights illuminated a starry night sky. Love, trust, and understanding had now solidified a bond that had developed out of adversity and hardship. 6 months later, Dylan remained behind bars, and the once somber Norris household had been utterly transformed. The garden, once silent and still, was now alive with the joyful laughter of Alice and Amber as they played freely, their giggles echoing across the lush, sunlit lawn. The house itself, once filled with tension and fear, had evolved into a true home, a place where love and safety reigned. Diana, no longer just the hired nanny, but now a cherished member of the family, sat on the porch, her heart light, a peaceful smile resting on her face as she watched the girls. Her new role came not only with a generous pay raise, but with something far more valuable, a deep sense of belonging she had never felt before. The once visible scars on her wrists, physical reminders of that terrifying night, had faded, just as the nightmares that used to haunt her had slowly disappeared. Mr. and Mrs. Norris soon appeared from the house, carrying a tray of freshly made lemonade. The Norris family had experienced a profound transformation after the terrifying home invasion. What once seemed like an ordinary life had shifted dramatically. The trauma they endured brought them closer in ways they hadn't anticipated. Now they treasured every moment together, choosing to work fewer hours and focus on building memories with their daughters, valuing family time above all else. "Diana, sweetheart, come join us," Mrs. Norris called warmly, her smile glowing with the peace she had finally reclaimed. On the porch, the twins, Alice and Amber, dashed towards her, their faces lit up with joy. Amber, always the chatty one, eagerly launched into an animated story about her latest adventure in the garden, while Alice, the quieter of the two, curled up contentedly on Diana's lap, finding comfort in the closeness. It was a snapshot of a family in harmony, the kind of happiness that felt hard-earned and deeply cherished. Mr. Norris, sitting nearby, raised his glass in a spontaneous toast. "To our family, and especially to you, Diana. We are so thankful to have you in our lives," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The bond between them, once tested, was now unbreakable. The invasion had left its scars, but it also brought about lasting changes for the better. The house was now equipped with a top-of-the-line security system, and the neighborhood had come together, forging a stronger sense of community. What had once been a source of fear and loss, the family's safe, now housed not only valuables, but also treasured mementos of the life they were rebuilding. As for Dylan, the former employee who had terrorized their home, he was serving his time in prison. In an unexpected act of compassion, the Norris family had chosen not to push for the harshest sentence, believing in the possibility of redemption. While the twins occasionally still woke up from bad dreams, they were gradually recovering with the love and support of their family. The family therapy sessions were instrumental in helping the girls work through their painful past, unraveling the layers of trauma bit by bit. Diana's unwavering love and comforting presence gave them the stability they had long been missing. As the evening sky transitioned into a breathtaking canvas of orange and pink hues, the Norris family sat together on the porch, soaking in the peaceful atmosphere. There was a palpable sense of hope and renewal in the air, a feeling that love and trust had finally conquered the darkness of their past struggles. Later that night, Diana gently tucked the girls into bed. For the first time in a long while, there was no sign of fear or hesitation, only an overwhelming sense of calm and gratitude. As she softly closed the door behind her, a warm smile spread across her face. Diana knew, without a doubt, that she had found her place in this world. She was in her own home, close to the family she had always wanted. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to keep bringing you touching, heartfelt stories every day. Be sure not to miss our next inspiring narrative. It's just around the corner. And don't go just yet. Click on the links now appearing on your screen for more hand-picked stories that will fill your heart with warmth and inspiration. We can't wait to see you there.